Hello everyone. This video is about patterns of organization, ways that we structure ideas and share thoughts, in writing in particular, but in any way that we communicate with people. When we try to communicate, we have a lot of different ideas that we want to communicate, and they need to be put in some type of structure, some type of pattern or organization. This could be a tool that helps the reader and listener understand what the writer and speaker want to communicate. This pattern of organization can be a structure that makes sense of all these different pieces, or you could think of it as an outline that gives focus and meaning to the writing. When we ask why is this necessary, let's stop and think about how many different ways we can try to communicate and how many understandings we often have. When we communicate with patterns, we try to understand the needs of people who are trying to put structure to ideas. We become effective at communicating what is most important, and it also helps us to understand other people's communications and improve our reading comprehension. All of these things are needs that are going to continue throughout our own lives. You're not going to be asked by someone on the street when you're 45 to write a contemporary essay, but you will be in a place in work where you're trying to communicate maybe a process that's not working very well, and you'll need to communicate why that's not happening. Or you might be writing a report about your department, and you might need to summarize the activity. So you're going to need to understand patterns as a way of trying to communicate effectively. So what are some of those common organizational patterns? You may be familiar with many of them, but one of the common ones is chronological. We organize by time. First this happened, then this happened, and after that. Very common in recording books or history. Might be useful in summarizing the events leading up to maybe a catastrophe in like a disaster management type situation. We can organize by sequence, and it's very closely related to time. We can organize by order. First this happened, second this happened, third this happened. And this could be useful in doing instructions, technical writing, how to do something. We organize spatially. We describe the physical space or layout. This could be useful for technical writing, travel writing, all kinds of different implications. Comparison contrast will probably be familiar to you. We organize by similarities and differences so that we can see the merit of one particular alternative. We organize topically. We take a look at the parts of the whole as a way of understanding. We might take a look at cause-effect. What are the determinants of the outcome? What were the things that resulted in this catastrophe? What are the effects of the bad policy? Lots of different life applications there. And another one would be problem solution. That is, organizing by the need for action and improvement. And we certainly have a lot of places in our world where we need to improve. Now, one important takeaway in all this is that a single topic can be organized in many different ways. Let's say, for example, that you had found a curriculum that was much preferable to the curriculum that Jefferson County currently has. So, one way you could organize a paper about it to show that this other curriculum were preferable would be to do a comparison contrast. Look at the Jefferson County curriculum, look at the curriculum that you wanted to purchase. And you'd look at the things that are similar and the things that are different, perhaps with the purpose of showing that those differences made the other curriculum superior. You could also organize that essay topically. You could look at each different goal of the curriculum. You could look at the materials for the curriculum. You could look at the student outcomes for that curriculum. You can, in other words, divide the topic into subtopics or logical parts and then talk about each of those. You could do a cause-effect structure if you wanted to talk about curriculum. So you could talk about the implementation of this curriculum and the effect on student achievement, maybe saying that student achievement was not as high as it was under this curriculum. You could talk about student interest surveys. You could talk about teacher effectiveness. You could talk about teacher interest. You could look at the effects of the curriculum that you'd introduced, a cause-effect. And you could also organize the same paper on Jeffco's curriculum as a problem solution paper. So you could say, here we have a problem, this curriculum is not meeting 21st century students' needs, and we're going to solve it by doing this other action and pursuing this other curriculum. So if you see, there's a lot of different ways that you could organize your ideas and get your opinions out, but organize it differently according to some different structures. So your challenge as a writer is to choose the best structure for communicating your ideas. So let's take a look at some of those patterns in detail. First, let's start with the topical pattern, which is probably the catch-all pattern. It's taking little pieces of the big picture. First, we'll talk about this, then we'll talk about this, then we'll talk about this, and we put it all together. Some examples of this pattern that you read in your first session were how teenagers spend their money and what is poverty. So, for example, in the essay, How Teenagers Spend Their Money, the writer spends a little bit of time first by talking about expenditures for food and giving some clarification that that involved restaurants rather than just hanging out somewhere else. Then there was a little bit of a transition, another subtopic, teenagers are spending money on clothes. Then toward the end, there was another subtopic here, teenagers spending money on personal care, gadgets, etc., but that still they were not spending money on these things here. So one item at a time, topically, this essay was organized. Similar to that, it was the poverty essay, and this is a really good one for looking at how repetition can drive a point home, but it looks at different aspects of poverty. Poverty is your physical surroundings, the smell. Poverty is being tired. Poverty is trying to stay clean. Poverty is keeping warm. It's, looking at different physical needs one item at a time. That would be a topical organization. So we ask, what's the pattern or the outline here? And basically it's an introduction, attention getter, and then several body paragraphs looking at pieces of the puzzle, followed by a parts to whole kind of analysis and a call to action, typically, with some kind of conclusion thrown on at the end to go back to the connecting point in the introduction. Another pattern of organization that's probably familiar to you is the comparison contrast, where you're trying to compare apples and oranges. Yes, they're both fruits, but they're kind of different. Yes, these are both electronic devices, communication devices, but they're kind of different. So you're helping your reader to see similarities and differences to draw attention to either the commonality, if that's what you want to emphasize, or the differences, if that's the point you're trying to make. So some examples on that we read in our previous session were The Ugly Truth About Beauty by Dave Barry. It was a humorous article in which he's looking at men versus women. He talks about how men see themselves, then he compares that to how women see themselves, talks about women having a low self-esteem, and then goes on basically to say that men don't have that problem. Poor women have to think that they're not superior, they're not good enough. So it's a comparison contrast essay, even if it is done humorously. Similarly, another one of the essays was the sloppy versus neat people, also done with kind of a facetious tongue-in-cheek tone, comparing sloppy people and neat people. And this one looks at all the things about sloppy people and then looks at all the things about neat people, and that's one acceptable way of organizing. The last essay that did comparison contrast was a comparison of conventional and alternative medication, and this one was kind of a one point at a time approach to diagnosis, life impact via kind of an ongoing maintenance versus fixing problems. So again, looking at different aspects of the two things that are being compared. That would be the pattern that you typically see with a comparison contrast. You'd have an introduction, you'd have the similarities, then you'd look at one point or aspect that makes them different, look at another trait that makes them different, a third point, and these are flexible. You could only do 2 points or you could do 4 points. And then a call to action to motivate the reader if what you're trying to do is establish similarity, or perhaps a call to action if you're trying to get them to go for the thing that's different, and then a conclusion that goes back to your introduction. And that would be the basic pattern for comparison contrast. A cause-effect essay is going to be particularly useful if you're trying to get action or you're trying to build convictions. Perhaps if you're trying to convince a neutral or even disagreeable audience of your position. So cause-effect is helping your reader to understand how one thing led to something else. Something else happened as a direct result and consequence of some particular event or cause. This type of writing comes out a lot in disaster management. If you look at the shootings that have happened in different places, or after 9/11, there was all kinds of cause-effect. This is what caused this to happen, and if we had just done this, then the effect would have been different. So there's a lot of sometimes chicken and egg conversation in this type of pattern. but it can be useful for showing that maybe some effects are not desirable, or that maybe we should eliminate some causes. So if that's your purpose, this is your outline that you want to use. Some examples from our reading. We did a couple that were useful last week. Defending Facebook has a little bit of this, and can watching reality shows be harmful? The Facebook had a little bit of a problem solution tint to it as well, but the idea was that the cause was excessive Facebook use, and the effects were internet addiction that was discussed here, and then students not getting a full academic experience because of some of this addiction that kept them off of doing their schoolwork and kept them doing other things, and how if you just get rid of this cause, then the effect is your grades improve. So cause effect to show that Facebook is bad. And speaking of technology, cause effect to show reality shows. Reality shows help us or make us think that reality is not objective. So the cause is the reality shows, and the effects are that we end up mocking people and that we create an audience that really doesn't understand that these qualities are not real. A hint that this is a cause-effect essay is here. Yet another effect of reality shows is a distorted depiction of relationships. So cause-effect there as well. And so we ask, what's that pattern for cause-effect? And this is actually a fairly flexible pattern here, but we start with an attention getter, an introduction. We explain the cause, and that could be a negative or a positive effect that could come from the cause, but then we go and look at the effects. What's one effect, what's a second effect, and then some kind of call to action, and a conclusion that goes back to the introduction. In history, you might do lots of causes, like the causes that led to World War I, and then the single paragraph on effects. So you can do like one cause, one effect. You could have multiple paragraphs on causes and one paragraph on effect. Or more likely, if you're discussing a contemporary issue, you could do the cause and then some of the several effects that result from that. So this is kind of a flexible one, but you would definitely put the causes before the effects in most cases. And the final pattern that we want to look at is problem solution. And this is very effective if you're trying to do something persuasive. You're trying to get to an audience that needs to be swayed to your position. So what you're trying to do is say, hey, wake up. We have a problem here and we need to do something about this. This is not ideal. We will all benefit if we just make this change. And some examples of that from our last session were the Killer Bean essay on coffee, and the Save the Elephants essay, and the In Praise of the F word, and that is failure, F for failure in schools. So take a quick look at those. The student model on coffee was talking about the loss of rainforest, the loss of birds, soil erosion, and then it came right out and said, what then is the solution? So that was a pretty big clue that this was a problem solution essay. Second example, also on a serious topic related to the environment, was about the elephants, different poaching activities that have occurred. And then there's different approaches to solving it, summed up by, here's the main solution. The world needs to unite like we've never done before to save our elephants. So the problem is, look what's happening to our elephant population. Here are some possible solutions. The big one is we need to all get together and work on those solutions. And then lastly, an essay that I've always enjoyed working with students, because you know this content, is In Praise of the F word, where the problem is students don't fail. They get passed along into different classes that they're not really able to do because they never learned skills. And the solution is that, according to this author, we need to go back to a policy that worked in the past. We need to give students the opportunity to fail so that they can then get the skills they need before they go on. Here's the solution. We have the solution to this problem. So, again, very effective if you're trying to sway people from their position to your position. So how do you outline that? It's pretty straightforward. Just as before, you have an attention getter. You give the history of the problem, the context, why it's a problem, give evidence that it's a problem, prove that it really is a big deal, then advocate for the solution that you have and give enough detail on it that the person can buy into it. And then give a call to action to motivate the reader and sum up with a conclusion that somehow connects back to your introduction. So when you choose what pattern is best for your topic, these are some things you might want to think about. You can ask yourself what you want your reader to know or do, and you might think about your audience with that. Is your audience agreeable, or is your audience someone that is disagreeable to your position? So if that's the case, you want to think about what type of pattern will work well for which audience member. If you want them just to understand, topical or comparison will probably do the trick. But if you want action, cause, effect, and problem solution patterns are going to be very effective. You might want to try creating a word web and then just look for connections in the words that you've laid out, and maybe even color code those. Maybe one color for comparison contrast, one color for problem solution. See what you come up with. You could also try out some of these outlines and see what works for you. Can you fit something into your pattern? And lastly, you can talk aloud to a friend for 5 minutes and see if your listener can figure out what it is that you're really passionate about saying in your essay topic. Different options here, and there are other ways you can look at this as well. So go ahead and go forth, look at your topic, create a pattern, and communicate your ideas. Have a good experience writing this essay.